Joe Lunardi's newest bracketology is out. And after Tennessee basketball got a huge win over Alabama, they have moved up to where you want them to be, which is a number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. They're not the only ones. Joe Lunardi's not the only one to push Tennessee basketball up to a number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. Jerry Palm's bracketology also has the Vols as a number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. So things are looking up for Tennessee with this bracketology ranking. Now, here's the problem. It's not across the board with the bracketology rankings. And this is going to be a little concerning and upsetting to some Tennessee fans. But I'm just giving you the data points. College Sports Madness, as of their March 3rd bracket, still had Tennessee as a number 2 seed. The Fox Sports bracket, which came out yesterday, had Tennessee as a number 2 seed as well. Right now, the 1 seeds come down to 6 different teams: Auburn, Duke, Alabama, Houston, Tennessee, and Florida. College Sports Madness had Duke in Tennessee's place. College Sports Madness had Auburn, Duke, Florida, and Houston. The Fox had Auburn, Duke, Alabama, and Houston. Now, what's the proper way to look at this? Who is in the best position for the number 2 seed? Well, after Tennessee's win over Alabama, you may not be excited about where this is going. Don't get too excited about Joe Lunardi's bracket or Jerry Palm's bracket. And here's why. The path to the number 1 seed is way tougher than it looks if you go by the metrics that they use. So we've just told you Tennessee is they're a number 1 seed in half of them and a number 2 seed in half the bracketologies. What about the metrics that are used to rank teams? Well, Tennessee's net ranking right now is number 5, behind Auburn, Duke, Houston, and Florida. It's assumed that Auburn, Duke, and Houston are going to be number 1 seeds. That's kind of a given. Auburn, Duke, Houston are the top 3 in the ESPN BPI. They're top 3 in the NCAA net rankings. And in the AP poll, they're the top 3 teams in the AP poll as of right now. And the coaches poll. So as of right now, those seem like the 3 locked-in teams. By every metric, those are the top 3 teams. The 4th number 1 seed really comes down to Tennessee, Florida, and potentially Alabama. Now, Tennessee is 1 spot ahead of Alabama in the net rankings. They're 1 spot ahead of Alabama in the BPI. They're 4th in the BPI, which is good news for them. They're 3rd in the RPI, 1 spot behind Alabama. Again, very good news for them to be that high in the RPI. Here's the problem. Alabama and Florida play this week. Tennessee plays Ole Miss and South Carolina to close out the season. If Tennessee's going to get the 4th number 1 seed, they have to stay ahead of Alabama and Florida. That's not as easy as it looks, because here's the truth of the matter. If Alabama beats Florida, which, again, they very well could. That game is on Wednesday on ESPN2. They play them at home. I think they're going to be favored. That quality win is going to push them ahead of Tennessee in the net rankings. And it may actually not drop Florida below Tennessee in the net rankings, which would push Tennessee to 6th. And the net rankings are the formula that are used the most by the selection committee for the number 1 seeds. On top of that, Alabama is going to maintain and actually increase their lead ahead of the Vols in the RPI. They also could jump Tennessee in the BPI if that happens. Now, I know what you guys are going to say. Well, Tennessee just beat Alabama. Yeah, but road versus home matters, particularly in the net rankings. And what they're going to look at, and what the committee could look at, is that Tennessee needed a last-second 3 to beat Alabama at home. It's not crazy when you take all this into account that Alabama ends up getting the number 1 seed, even if Tennessee wins out, because winning out means winning at Ole Miss. Not a bad win, don't get me wrong, but not some blow-you-away win, okay? And Then beating South Carolina at home. South Carolina is the worst team in the SEC this year. So Tennessee's path to a number 1 seed is a lot more difficult than you might think. Because I do believe the winner of the Florida-Alabama game is going to bump Tennessee. They split the series with Florida. Their win over Alabama was a last-second shot at home. The really only way, if you're Tennessee, to hope to maintain a spot ahead of them is if Alabama beats Florida and then loses to Auburn on Saturday. But that's at Auburn. It's really hard to see if if Alabama split that, if they would stay behind Tennessee in the net rankings. This is real difficult. And I've told you guys, I don't believe the selection committee prioritizes the conference tournament whatsoever. But I honestly think that this year, that's going to be how they determine the number 1 seed, the other 1 or 2 1 seeds from the SEC. That's what makes this extremely difficult for them. We're going to talk about this a little more in a second. First, the show brought to you by Double D Piping.
Double D Piping provides full-service fire protection on any scale. From residential homes to government facilities, we can assist any customer through design, fabrication, installation, inspection, and demonstration of fire suppression systems. With 30 years of service across 5 states and a full staff with over 40 years experience, our quality can't be beaten. Don't get caught watching what you could have prevented. Call Double D Piping.
Sticking to the comments on whether or not Tennessee basketball should be a number 1 or number 2 seed, Travis says Tennessee would be a number 2 seed if they were undefeated. It's ridiculous. Travis, I mean, look, I can't look. Can you look at a year in Tennessee history where they should have been a number 1 seed? I mean, even this year, I just went down with the net rankings. It's very close. It's 5 to they're in the 4 to 6 range across all rankings. Yes, they're third in the RPI, but the RPI has been demoted significantly below the net rankings and the BPI for what seeding you should be. Tennessee is a number 4 seed in the BPI and a number 5 seed in the net rankings. What I'm talking about is what's projected to happen going forward, because it's hard to see Tennessee staying ahead of Florida and Alabama or Alabama in either of these situations. And to get the number 1 seed, they'll have to stay ahead of both because I'm sorry, but I think the winner of that game between Florida and Alabama tomorrow is going to be the one that pushes ahead of Tennessee. And I don't even think it matters if Alabama loses to Auburn on Saturday. That's a road loss to the number 1 team in the nation by all metrics. So with that in mind, I don't think Tennessee's path to a number 1 seed is as clear cut even with this win as it usually is. Guys, I know I'm 180ing myself from this past weekend when we had Will West on, when we talked about when I said I thought Tennessee it wouldn't matter the conference tournament if they won out. They'd be a lock for number 1 seed. I was wrong. I looked at how things played out. I looked at how the net rankings played out. The net rankings and the effects that were had based on that win that Tennessee had over Alabama were not as substantial as I thought they would be. So Tennessee does not have enough breathing room. And beating Ole Miss and South Carolina just won't be enough to help them this week. And you really don't want Alabama to lose to Florida and beat Auburn, by the way, which is a very possible team because then Alabama and Florida both move ahead of Tennessee. If Florida beats Alabama and then Alabama beats Auburn, or if Alabama beats Florida and Auburn, actually that's a more clear-cut way, then Alabama, Houston, Duke, and Auburn would stay ahead of Tennessee. Now, we're just talking SEC for a minute. Talking about Duke, I mean, they do visit North Carolina, which is a possible loss. They visit them March 8th, so that'll be their final game of the year. Houston, on the other hand, playing in the Big 12, visits Baylor at the end of the year. Again, those are both, Duke and Houston are both visiting solid teams on the road, more to lose than gain. If either of them loses those games, then you could maybe then see Tennessee moving ahead of one of them. And then that's another path. But in just terms of the SEC, it's hard to see Tennessee staying ahead of Alabama and Florida, which looks like it could be necessary if Tennessee is going to do what it needs to do to get a number 1 seed. Now, Tennessee versus Houston in the net rankings, Tennessee is 10-5 in quadrant 1 games. Houston's 8-4. Tennessee's 4-0 in quadrant 2. Houston's 9-0. So in quadrant 1 and quadrant 2, Tennessee's 14-5. Houston is 17-4. I mean, sorry, end of the day, that's a better record. And they both are undefeated in quadrant 3 and quadrant 4 games. To be fair, they're undefeated in quadrant 2, 3, and 4 games. But 17-4 versus 14-5 in quadrant run in 2 games. I get Tennessee's played a much tougher schedule with more quadrant 1 games, so it's tougher to decipher all of this. But 15 plus 4 is 19, 12 plus 9. Overall, Tennessee's, you could say that the schedule strength is not as clear cut as you might think, because quadrant 2 versus quadrant 1, but then there's quadrant 3 versus quadrant 4. And Tennessee has actually, while they played more quadrant 1 games, Houston's played more quadrant 1 and 2 games, and those do count together. So that's kind of an interesting thought. So again, if Houston does end up losing over the weekend, or if Duke ends up losing, then we're talking about a different story, because when you talk Tennessee versus Duke, Tennessee's 10-5 in quadrant 1 games. Duke is 6-3. Duke's 6-0 in quadrant 2. Tennessee's 4-0. It's a little bit difficult to see how Duke is so high in the net rankings. I'm not exactly sure how the formula works on that, but if Duke does lose to UNC over the weekend, I do think they would drop too. So UNC and Baylor could help Tennessee. Florida, Alabama, that's going to be tricky. The point of the matter is there is a difficult path for Tennessee to maintain their number 1 seed that is projected by a few people now, not many.